Hey everybody, welcome back to the Indie Grounds podcast. I am so excited for this week's band that we're going to be talking about. If you haven't noticed, I follow a format where I talk about a band one week, I'll talk about an individual musician the next week, and then I talk about a song. And in the future, I'm probably going to start incorporate an indie album as well. But I have just been getting so much good responses from you guys the last couple of months, especially pretty much this summer. And I just got to give a huge shout out to you guys. Like I always say every week, I love talking about indie music. It is the biggest part of my life, and it is the biggest category of music, even to date, that I listen to. And this week is no exception. In fact, I would venture to say that this week's artist is one of the most, I believe, underappreciated indie bands that I could ever possibly review. The band is called The Naked and Famous. So as always, we're going to give you a brief summary, a brief history of who The Naked and Famous are, each kind of individual band member's backgrounds, and how they kind of rose even to indie stardom and pretty much where they're at today. So, the very beginning, The Naked and Famous was composed of three people: Alyssa, Tom, and Jesse. Alyssa was the lead singer, Tom was their lead guitarist, and Jesse was their drummer. All of them met while attending college, and they are in New Zealand. Now, what's kind of interesting and I think really unique and cool is Alyssa was raised in a Laotian refugee family, and they ended up moving to New Zealand. So it's really cool to hear her accent. You know, like you see her and she's Laotian, she speaks and she has such that kind of Aussie accent, but then her singing, to me at least, sounds just very American. You know, kind of that synth new wave voice. So it's so cool to see her. And then what's also interesting is at the time, Alyssa and Tom, their lead guitarist and other founding member, was actually dating. So they're dating. The three of them start a band. Of course, they get other band members as well. And they are right in the middle of college when they start to discover, hey, we're pretty talented. You know, we should kind of see where this can take us. And it's kind of the normal story of a lot of the musicians. Their family was musicians. I believe Alyssa and Tom both had musical parents involved in the music, either industry or they played a lot of instruments. So they were raised that way, so they decided to make the band. And what's kind of different is they hit stardom almost immediately right off the bat. And what's kind of interesting too is they said in an interview that coming from New Zealand, you kind of picture it as a bunch of small towns. So it has a lot of small town mentality, you know, and it seemed like the path that musicians take when they're in New Zealand is you leave New Zealand to become big, and then you come back to New Zealand after you've made it. That's going to come into play a little bit later as we go on in the story. But because they were becoming so big, they released an album, and the album was called Passive Me, Aggressive You. And I am fairly confident, if you listen to indie music in the beginning of the 2010s, you for sure heard their first huge single, probably even to this date, the biggest single that they have made yet, and that is Young Blood. Amazing synth driving behind it, mixed with good guitar playing and percussion. And then both Alyssa and Tom usually sing in their songs as well, so it's kind of cool to hear the back and forth singing as well. They had several other hits off of that album too, and it was huge. You know, it was huge. Young Blood was used in a lot of TV shows, in a lot of music videos, and if you remember, like I said, before, a lot of New Zealand musicians, once they get big, they try to get as big as they can before they end up going back home. And the first part of that is exactly what the Naked and Famous did. They got really big and they took advantage of it. They toured extensively across North America, across Europe, some parts of Asia, but usually North America and Europe. And they were on the road for over 2 years. But that is where their similarities with that idea ends. They looked at themselves and they actually thought, we should not go back home. Going back to New Zealand would be a mistake, and there's not much for us there. So we need to actually stay away and remain in America, which is what they did. So when they started to mix and started to produce their second album, In Rolling Waves, they actually did all of that by moving out to California and buying a house together as bandmates. That is where they recorded their second album, and their lead single off of that was Hearts Like Ours. Honestly, personally, that is one of my favorites. I highly recommend listening to it as well. Very underappreciated song. We Kill Giants was on that album as well. Very underappreciated song. You know, this band just, I feel like they really needed to deserve to get some more love out there. You know, they're just an incredible band. But the second album went pretty normally. You know, it's the normal stuff. They release it, they tour for it, they go all over the world, you know, trying to gain momentum for that album. And then what happens is right before the release of their third album, in fact, as they were working on their third album, pardon me, if you remember way back when I started, I mentioned that Alyssa and Tom were dating. Well, that is actually where they broke up. So they break up, and as they do, they write their third album. Their lead single off of their third album was called Higher. And I feel like this is kind of where the momentum was starting to slow. So not only are they kind of hitting a low point as a band, but the two biggest people in the band break up. And as you can imagine, if the core of your band dated and now it's over, you could imagine kind of the tension, how hard it was for everybody. You know, I don't know for sure. I couldn't really find anything about, you know, if this led to the next kind of venture of what happened with the Naked and Famous. But if you remember, I had mentioned that Jesse, their drummer, was the third founding member of the Naked and Famous. Well, after their third album, he actually left the band, and the other two members soon followed. So let's just pause for a second, because you got to think of how crazy this is. You know, for Tom and for Alyssa, they break up. You know, they're no longer a couple. They release the third album, which is, you know, just filled with tons of breakup songs, and it's not very well received. You know, they don't get a lot of momentum off of it. And then their friends, maybe even the people that were helping keeping everything together, leave the band, including one of the founding members. So now you got to imagine, what do you do at this point? You know, both of them have uprooted themselves. They have left their family life behind, and they have moved to a new continent out of everything. You know, they are very far away from friends and family and home, and they're out in California. Well, what's kind of amazing is both Tom and Alyssa looked at each other and they worked things out. Not so much worked out to get back together again as a couple, but they worked things out, and they realized that if they wanted to keep making their music together, they wanted to continue their art, they had to work through their differences. They had to work through the breakup. And that is exactly what the both of them did with their fourth album. And once again, bad luck seemed to hit, because they released their fourth album in the beginning of 2020. And as you all know, that is when the coronavirus came out. And so that killed momentum for that album, as it did for many albums back then, because they couldn't promote it, they couldn't tour it, they couldn't get the word out that they had made another album. And it's kind of funny because the album name is called Recovery. And it just was so fitting because it almost described that process that Tom and Alyssa had to do to work through, their breakup and all the hard times that they had. And that is kind of where we're left right now. We're in 2023. They haven't released an album since Recovery. And it was also a huge transition of sound because Recovery is very popish, and they went heavy with the keyboards and electronics, kind of went away from the big 5-piece band that they used to have. So, it's going to be interesting to see what happens next with them. I think they are a tremendously talented band. I really hope they get some more recognition, some more love. They have toured and opened for many huge bands, but they themselves never quite got that break. And again, we're going to have to see where things go from now. But that's all I had for this week. This was The Naked and Famous. I would highly recommend you listen to their first album. Some songs, other than the ones that I mentioned, I'll go over them again. Punching in a Dream is one. Young Blood is another one. Girls Like You is another one. And then Hearts Like Ours, I Killed Giants, and Higher off of their third album as well. But that's it for The Naked and Famous for this week. And I appreciate so much your guys' support. And I will see you all next week.